My name is Jason Cassidy. I'm the CEO of Shinydocs Corporation. We'll talk a little bit about Shinydocs at the end. I don't want to make this about a company or a pitch at all, but we are born out of a simple question: is why is none of our information in the information management systems that we're supposed to use? And what I mean by that is we go into organizations after organization and we see these structured systems like enterprise content management. So I'm thinking SharePoint, OpenText, IBM's, lots of other systems like that. And of course, there is other like business intelligence, SAP, Maximo, and other systems. Our technology, we crawl across this information so we get a complete picture of every document that's out there, all the duplication, and then we start layering on analytics. But what we find is that the information that is out there is just massively dwarfing the information that's under management. It is nothing for a corporation to have their actual records content that might be under their record line or their OpenText content suite. It might be nothing for them to have 1% of their data in there, 0.5%. Or we launched that thing 5 years ago and we don't have anything in there yet. Oh, well, and there's all sorts of these conversations around, well, we didn't get the right buy-in, or we didn't have enough people to put the information in. And what I'm here today to say that we're going to take advantage of some new technologies and some new ideas to think about this differently. We're going to invert the conversation to say, there's no advantage to try to move all of this information into one thing to manage it. The metaphor that I like to use is, imagine that you are responsible for fisheries across Idaho or the United States. And then you say to people, okay, well, for me to understand each of these ecosystems, you got to move all the fish into this lake that's right beside me so I can study them and make sure that I understand what's going on. Obviously, that's silly, but that's what we're doing with our documents in our unstructured content all the time. We get mad at people because they use their email or they use OneDrive instead of their proper SharePoint site. They didn't put the attribution on and we couldn't find it. And it is their fault in a sense, but unfortunately, nobody's ever brought a tool that is just ergonomic enough and easy enough for people to get in and start using. So what we have is ultimately a huge sprawl of information. And unfortunately, the idea of putting it all into one bucket, putting it all into SharePoint or putting it all into an OpenText or an IBM or anything else is dead. There's just too much data. And I'll take this graph here. David McDermott knows this particular graph. I'm not going to say who the customer is or where this information came from, but just to get you a sense that this is content creation by month for a big organization. It has millions of documents and millions of records. Something interesting happened in 2009. And the interesting thing that happened in 2009 is they eclipsed the capability of any enterprise content management system on the planet of managing all their data. So what I mean by that is the largest SharePoint instances, the largest OpenText, the largest IBM file nets in the world have about 100 terabytes in there. Well, that was 2009. So if that's 100 terabytes, this area here, how much is this? This only goes to 2017. Like obviously there's way more data since then. So the kind of thing that we hear is, okay, well, we still want to migrate into SharePoint. We'll take the most important 10 terabytes or the most important 50 terabytes or the thing that got our butt kicked in the litigation last year, and we'll put that in. Well, what about the rest of the data? Well, we just hope that we don't need to find that. So what I'm going to suggest, obviously, is that that's a little silly. But I'm going to pause because I think this is probably a little bombastic and open to some challenges, or if you want to tell me I'm crazy, wide open to that, or maybe some support. Either way, I'll just open it up for anybody to air grievances or support.
Dave, hey, Jason, it's Dave. this goes along with the line that I always say is the ability to create content is outstripping our ability to manage it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very nice graph that shows just that issue. So that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah.
Going back on mute.
Yeah. Thank you, David. And that is kind of the situation. I appreciate David hopping in there. And the thing that I say to my staff is silence implies agreement. So this is your opportunity to disagree. So I will proceed, assuming that you're at least in some way agreeing with this situation that we have, that there's information everywhere. I'm going to look at this a little bit more specifically in a sense of a historical way of trying to do this work. This is actual records indexed per year. And when I say index, I mean people are going in and taking a record. This is a vibration reading from a pump. This is a safety check on a particular piece of equipment. This is an engineering certification, all those normal things that businesses do with their records. So when there's an accident on site, when they need to repair, when they need to replace stuff, they have a nice record of the type of activities that historically happen. Well, something interesting happened there at around 2018 is the ability for people to rapidly create records changed. People started walking around with their devices. People started walking around with tablets and the mobile computers instead of with a piece of paper. It sped up this activity. Every piece of equipment started generating more information. For example, a manufacturer that we work with is each piece of equipment that rolls off the line has 17,000 individual data points, right down to each torque value on every screw or every bolt. That's interesting. That generates a lot of information. And the ability for people to go through and grab a document and drag it into the right place in their ECM system and put the attributes on it so it's findable in the future got eclipsed in 2018. Their capability was around 130,000 documents per year for their team of 17 people. Well, that's a problem because they were up to, it's over 1 million documents, 1 million records in their system in 2019. And then it's projected by the end of this year to go up to 6.9 million at the rate of this increase. So this is the reality that we're dealing with. So my thesis is we need to stop going to try to change the way people work or moving information to a central spot to manage it and back up the train all the way back to where our customers are and then manage the data there, understand the data there, provide our records management value where it is and the way people work, and then try to nudge them forward towards whatever it is that we need out of those systems. Because the idea of this big migration to something is clearly long gone. This slide here is something, just a quick reminder that we don't want to talk about systems. Nowhere in the CVS litigation or the PG&E litigation did somebody ask, oh, well, tell me about your custom columns in SharePoint. What they asked was, do you have these? Can you produce the records? Did you manage them according to your policy? Did you dispose of them according to your policy? Do you know where they are to support this particular matter at hand? And unfortunately for these organizations, they didn't. And for most organizations, they don't. So I apologize for hitting the problem really hard and really brash because there are solutions. But the solutions are more aligned with the way that we work anyway. So let's get into talking about solutioning a little bit. Ultimately, a good start is to start considering your content like this. How much of it is a business record? And I don't necessarily mean a platonic record, like something that absolutely must follow the ISO certification. I just mean something that needs to support your business. How much of your data is that? So can we positively identify what that is? Can we use some techniques to know what that is? Forget about moving it anywhere. Just what is it and where is it? How much of it is redundant, obsolete, and trivial information? So either byte by byte, exactly the same. How much of it is similar? How much of it do you not need anymore? When we crawl customers' content, we always find movies. We always find inappropriate content. We always find stuff like the dial-up networking instructions from 1999 in order to get into your corporate network. We don't need that stuff anymore. So let's put it on a schedule to get rid of it. So I'm going to show you some kind of neat techniques today that get into artificial intelligence and using other systems in order to inform this content. And I'm not going to talk at all about moving this data anywhere. You're welcome to do that at some point in the future. I like OneDrive, it's cool. We can collaborate over there. I like my shared drive. Let's put a little bit better permissions management on top of that, and we can use our CAD applications and our linked Excel spreadsheets until we're blue in the face there. There's nothing wrong with those systems. What scares people about them is they seem like the Wild West. So let's inform us as to what that content is. Let's give it a natural life cycle, and let's move our way out of this idea of data management into information management. And what I mean by that is all these documents that are out there, you will connect them to all the cases or accounts, the asset that they are appropriately linked to, what people need to know them, what processes are associated with, what regulations and policies apply to them, and what transactions apply to them. The model that I'd like you to think about, and maybe something to Google after this call, or Bing, you can even Bing this stuff, is go and have a look at something called the Facebook graph. Maybe we agree that Facebook is evil, maybe we don't. Well, one thing I hope everybody can agree on is that they're pretty good at understanding the relationships between people and content. So when somebody comes along and says, I want to buy this kind of demographic from you so I can push some ads to them, they know exactly how to find that information because they've already pre-calculated those connections. They pre-calculated the people that are interested in particular political views, people that are interested in particular sports. They know all these things about you. And your unstructured content is exactly the same. We want to use the hints that are available to connect those documents to the particular cases, to the particular assets, to the people, wherever they are, so that then we can understand what the content is. So the first thing that we do with a customer is you take, in this case, there's some SharePoint data, there's email data, there's all sorts of stuff that's out there. And the first thing to do is to transform it from this kind of opaque piece of knowledge to a visualization. How many documents are out there? So the biggest customers that we do this with, we do over a petabyte of visualization. We're not migrating anything anywhere. All we're doing is just like Google, we just ask, hey, what do you have on your site? What do you have on your shared drive? What do you have on your shared drive? And we keep track of what we've seen, but we don't move it or store it or whatever. But we do know all the words on every page. We do know all the duplication associated with the content. And that creates the foundation for being able to start making some good decisions and start layering on a lot of customer value. So an obvious first thing is just to find things that are redundant, obsolete, and trivial. So redundancy, if you just want to find duplication, there's lots of tools out there that might dedupe on your file share and you say, hey, that's good enough. But it is not good enough from the following perspective. If there is a file that, let's say this is the signed version of the contract that should be on legal hold, and it's on the file share, and I find it, and I change its permissions to make it immutable, I might think that I'm done. But maybe I'm not done because that file is also in somebody's email outbox as an attachment. That file is also on somebody's desktop. That file, it could be on OneDrive or some other location. And these are problems if you don't know where all that content is. So I'm going to suggest, think about this in a plurality. Just because you might have some storage that says, hey, that cluster is the same as this one, we're only going to store it once. Yay, we've compressed some storage. That's not solving the records management problem across your entire organization. Because remember, you got SharePoints, you got hundreds of file shares, you've got other systems. Have a look at it across all these systems. So when we start creating these dashboards and then start layering on some content understanding, for example, it's much more interesting to know how many job offers and how much rot that you have, how many documents that fit into particular classifications. This information usually finds its way up to the department VPs, and then the department VPs will take it over to their EVPs, which will go to the C level, which often goes to the board, and the board looks at it for the first time in the history of the company and goes, wow, I know how much data I have, and I have a sense of what it is. So one of our biggest customers looked at this capability. Their original idea was all about automating the understanding of content. And we did quite a good job of that. Like we have the ability to go into the system and use artificial intelligence and other things and just be able to right click and say, hey, find me everything that's the same as this design document or nearly duplicate in these types of things. It's great. I'm not going to bore you with the details of what algorithms that we use or how we do these implementations. None of that really matters. But what does matter is you can find all of the contracts. You can find all of a specific type of document, not by bringing in data scientists and doing the work, but by right clicking and saying find similar. Happens very quickly. So once you identify what the content is, and once your board identifies, hey, you can find every word on every page, and you know where each piece of content is, let's give that to the users. So a natural first step is to give them Google behind the firewall. And the reason why this is different than your SharePoint search. SharePoint search is terrible because the only thing it gives you is kind of full text, and it only works against content that's actually in SharePoint. So if you've got file shares everywhere and you're only searching for these particular words, you better be really good at crafting those words. There's no concept of being able to go across multiple systems, say only find me particular document types, only find me ones from particular regions or locales. That's where creating the connections between the data comes into play and how that becomes quite powerful. So being able to do a search, like saying, okay, I want to show me the pipeline documents that are pressure tests only from Washington, is a far more powerful search. And then adding in specific keywords, that is way better than just trying to find particular words. What's cool about behind the firewall search is it checks permissions. It makes sure that you have access to every piece of content that is there. So it's not the Wild West of Google showing everybody everything. This is making sure that Jason's view is going to be different than David's view, and it's going to be different from anybody else's view. So I'll go back to one of our biggest customers. This is once they figured out, and it was the CEO that figured this out. It's like, I can get every word on every page. And then they walked us through some of the challenges that they have only 70% utilization of their break fix repair staff, technicians on site. This is a big nuclear power plant. And they want to get them up to 100%. But the problem is in supply chain. Do we have stock on hand? Do we know the best practice? Do we have the magnesium O-rings that we need instead of the stainless steel ones? Because if you put the stainless steel ones too close to a reactor, they melt. These are important pieces of information that it takes hours, perhaps days, perhaps weeks, perhaps months to research and find what they've done before, especially on a pump that was installed in 1967. Well, being able to find every word on every page helps a ton. So they took this one idea of understanding where everything is and then bringing it back to their end users. Some other customers take it a different direction. They'll say, okay, I want to migrate really intelligently to a SharePoint Online, or I want to go to some other location. It's not our favorite thing, but hey, we'll support that because we know every word on every page. We can combine that information with other systems. When I say other systems, I'll give a quick example. And we'll go over here to this one here. I've got a lot of drug submission documents in here. So the beauty is the company that gave us the drug submission documents also gave us a list of the different drugs. So we used natural language, a subset of artificial intelligence, to go off and find all the different drug names in each of the documents. So we can find out for sure that there's 76 Zoloft documents. And then we can migrate the specific 76 OLAF documents into SharePoint or whatever location is appropriate. We even know that of the 76, there's 11 that are duplicate out there. So you can start doing redundant, obsolete, and trivial analysis across that. So I've talked a lot. I've talked a ton. This has been 26 minutes of me monologuing. And I'm going to pause here for a second because my thesis going back is pretty simple. It is everything that I'm showing here is about understanding your content, where it is, and then making your decisions, rather than that whole idea of, okay, we're going to bring in this other tool that has a reputation for getting 1% of your data under management, and we're going to put everything there. Gartner says that you have an 83% chance of a failure in your migration, and there's nothing about records management that says that you have to migrate anything anywhere, if you look at the standards for that. So I'll pause. I hope that I've ruffled some feathers and open it up for any questions, comments, concerns, or accolades so far.
So, Jason, question this Dave.
Yep.
Are you doing any classification in place? You don't need to mention names or clients or anything like that, but you know, we've always had issues with classifying in place. We've always tried to move content into a single source of truth, however difficult that might be. Are any of your clients actually using classification schema, using their record retention schedule and classifying to their record codes or anything like that?
Yeah, thank you, David. The yes, the very quick answer is an absolute yes. And as you know, there's a long tail associated with classification. So certain things, like for example, loosely classified information out there, like this stuff here, you see that some stuff is labor, infrastructure, or whatever. Most organizations might have a loose classification. So we can set that as a base classification. That happens overnight, saying every one of these documents, we'll call it an infrastructure document and be done with it. That's super easy. With a tool like this, literally across all of your systems, we layer on that knowledge and classification in place across all the systems. Where it gets more complicated is where we can show you the keywords that are common across a particular subset of your data. Like for example, when we went into a oil and gas company, we crawled a subset of their file shares and we showed them, hey, these are the words that tend to come out. Let's look at these operations documents and find out why they're operations documents. Look, I don't know what a mail ballot is. Tell me what a mail ballot is. What's a midstream document? Well, that's obviously a big thing in oil and gas. But you start asking, why are these words appearing? And giving the operators some tooling to not have to do data science. Data science is awful, but just to do search across their systems. They can find particular people's names. They can do things like GDPR compliance and searches. So find me every document that has people's names, corporation names, use things like natural language, regular expressions, and others to be able to find things, salaries, and this kind of detail, and attribute all of these documents. But the beauty is none of these documents are moved anywhere in order to do that. So to find out that Kevin Kindle, no idea who Kevin is, he's exchanged a number of emails, and as part of the ZL Technologies and Enron data set, and here's the location of where we found these emails, along with their subject and that information. So the ability to do classification in place, all of a sudden now is inverted. Rather than you trying to go and find where the information is, get it into a system that allows you to classify it, and then going through the heavy exercise of classifying, we invert it. Your biggest challenge now is finding people in your organization just to tell you what the heck one of these documents is. What is this operation document? Are there others like it? If I go in and I search for like Lipitor, which seemed to be one of my most common documents out there. Okay, it looks like that is a Lipitor drug submission, but I want to find everything that's just a drug submission. I don't want to find just Lipitor one, so I go off and I do my artificial intelligence search, and it comes back and it says 689 documents were a lot like that Lipitor one. No, I picked a Lipitor. There is 80 Lipitor ones, so let's go down a little deeper and find one that's not a Lipitor one. So this is a drug submission. Clearly not Lipitor, probably related to Lipitor somehow, maybe. But the AI has identified that this is 75% similar to the other ones. So then from here, we can set classifications, we can set attribution so that we can make it findable and actionable without having to move it. That does take time, but it is the whole time, 100% of the time is in your ability to find people in the organization to inform the data, as opposed to you working really hard to move the data someplace to then go and find people to be able to manage the data.
So one more question, then I'll be quiet. So is it capable to upload record category? Obviously, it sounds like it is, right? But could I upload a client retention schedule in here and classify that content to those category names or
That's correct.
retention periods? Okay.
Yeah. So in this case, we have classification of a monograph. So all we're doing, because we're not actually moving any content anywhere, all we're doing is just layering on understanding wherever the content is. So in this case, here's every document that's out there that's marked for disposal. Some of them are whatever CAFAC 002 is. I don't even know what that is. Space Agency document, immigration, CRTC. These things all have particular retention schedules associated with it. So within our system, you set up a rule that says everything that's a CAFAC 002 is going to survive for, let's say, the last modified date plus 7 years or something like that. So I can go into our disposition schedule here and just pick some dates. I'll pick some in the past. I haven't actually let's grab some in the future. It'd be more fun to do that. So we'll grab documents that are, this looks like a big date. It's probably like product monographs. Good. So here is all the documents that are supposed to be deleted on November the 1st, 2026. There's 4,729. How do we know they're supposed to be deleted? Because the rule is the last modified date plus 7 years. So last modified date would have been 2019, 11/01-ish. And they're all monographs. So that's how you set up that schedule. So what our customers end up doing, because constantly data is being created, because constantly data is being moved and manipulated, what they'll do is they'll just set up scheduled tasks to continually crawl the information, apply these rules. Okay, is it easy? Is it something as easy as a .mov file is going to be deleted? Something that contains these keywords, we're going to quarantine. We'll move it over to a different location. So these scheduled tasks just run all the time against the data. Whenever they find anything new that matches one of these patterns, they flag it as having this pattern. And another task literally just says every time you find something that's a CAFAC 002, then make it deleted on a particular date, which is calculated usually from last modified date. Sometimes it's from create date, sometimes it's from last access, and sometimes it's from some formula based upon the content inside of there. We can do things like, for example, because this is just a big search engine, essentially, it allows you to go in and say, okay, here are all of our active customers, and here is all of our passive customers or inactive customers. So for a date to make sense, they would have this document here, they can be deleted if it is regarding an inactive customer that has been inactive for more than 3 years. Then we should delete that document. So you just feed in that list the same way that we fed in lists of drug submission names, the same way we feed in salary information into the system just from these lists. We use that as part of the calculation to understand what the content is. And then based upon that, you get two groups. Here are the inactive ones, they're on the disposition schedule. Here are the active ones, disposition schedule has not kicked in yet.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. So
Jason, I'm curious to know how you deal with movie files and things that don't have much in the way of text, or maybe they haven't been OCR'd if they're an image. How does that work into this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So OCR is something that the tool natively will do for images, uh, non non-searchable PDFs. We will OCR it for our purposes. We're not going to go and change the document like Adobe will do or something like that. We just have a look at it as if it's an image, and we will get every word on every page, which does allow us to, if we go back to that the search results, quite often we will see that the documents are what I'll say old-timey documents that are these are not OCR'd PDFs, but we can still get every word on every page. We can even identify shapes like, for example, this is called a pressure wheel. We can identify when pressure tests are inside of a document. We're terrible at reading handwriting. That's okay. At least we can say, hey, there's definitely a pressure test here, and definitely it is for this one particular zone or whatever. The so as far as something like a video file goes, video files tend to have audio in them, just like we're doing right now. So when I upload this to our Zoom cloud, it actually creates a transcript of the call. And some of the technology that we worked with before, like for example, this sales tool called Gong, will actually attribute the different voices to the different people because they know that David talked for this time because he's David in Zoom, and Warren talked for this time because he's Warren in Zoom, and Jason talked for this time because he's Jason in Zoom. So it actually attributes that information in a text readable format that then we can consume. So the beauty of taking a what I'll call a services approach to this, and I'm not saying services and that we're customizing anything. We've got all these tools at our disposal, and we bring the tools to the location where the content is. What I mean by that is you don't have to ask, hey, does your tool do X? Because we have this proprietary wastewater management system and it uses this on the shared drive. Can your thing replicate that or replace it? That's our answer is no. Why would you want to do that? If we know that we can extract the text out of a video, or we can even do image recognition, it's not us. We're downloading TensorFlow and doing the same thing that Google would do in their cloud or Microsoft would do in their cloud, only for the purposes of identifying that data and extracting that information to enrich our analytics engine so that you can make a better decision. So the story here is all about how do we find the information, then how do we layer on the services to extract that value, and then on top of that, then we get back to I like coming back to this document here. How do we layer on the fundamentals of records management on top of the content, wherever the content is? Because if you agree with our first axiom, our first principle here is that there's just way too much data out there to move it to one place that's going to do all this management for you. It's not Office 365. It's nothing else is going to do all the data for all of the world. So how do you identify the documents that are applicable to your particular activity? Well, you go to where the documents are, and then you layer on that value. You do the OCR where the documents are, you text extract, you identify for a video, the audio transcripts. You can even do things like image recognition within videos to identify, hey, is this trucks in this, or is it pumps, or whatever. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but this is a big statistical numbers game that we're trying to understand literally hundreds of millions or billions of documents where they were completely not understood before. So we layer on this level of knowledge and keep layering it on. I apologize. It's going to turn into a slightly longer answer than it needs to be, but the way of thinking that we're trying to encourage people is think of content management and records management services as a lifetime. This is not a project that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, because there will always be new content types generated. There will always be new forms and formats. There will always be new systems. Microsoft 365 is not the last system that you will ever use. At some point in the future, there'll be something else that comes along that's even better or faster or cheaper or whatever, and then you'll start using that. So if you think of it in terms of, we are going to do discrete projects to identify this particular type of document for this particular value within the company, but they're little story arcs within this lifetime of content. So it's an infinite game that we're playing with documents wherever they are. And it's just a series of these finite little projects. So when you start thinking of it as an infinite game, it starts painting the picture of, okay, it doesn't even make sense to try to lock in my thinking on one particular technology or one particular location. It is, how do I get the value that this document needs where that document is? And the way to do that is to layer on the understanding. Everyone, this is a visualization, not, these are physical locations. They happen to be wellheads in just a little bit north of you guys. And these wellheads are described by documents. And the documents themselves didn't actually have lat long information in there, but they had other geo identifiers. So these documents tell a story that map to the real world. How do you map these documents to the real world wherever they are so that we can find them, make them part of the process, records management, delete them, dispose of them? And that's why it's a great question to ask, can the system do X? But the better question is, can X be done? And if it can, the next question is, how do I take it to where my documents are so that it can be part of my records management strategy? It's just a different way of thinking. It's a longer game.
Thanks. I like the concept of taking the transcript of the audio. That's a good way to handle it.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Yeah, because there's so many. We're so used to the vendors that are out there kind of breaking our legs and then selling us a crutch. And what I mean by that is they'll say, okay, well, move it over here. And oh, I'm sorry that I'm breaking all of your macros in your linked Excel spreadsheets. Those are all broken now. But here, we'll sell you a link fixer that'll fix up 40% of them. And then you have to hire people to manually go and fix the other 60%. And we kind of begrudgingly go, okay, fine. So we go do that, and you get through the process. And at the end of it, about 70% of the documents kind of work, and the other 30% don't work. Everybody's mad and tired and frustrated. And then you realize, man, that's totally what happened. They broke my legs, and then they sold me a crutch to fix it. So what I'm suggesting is the technique that I'm doing here is not a Shinydocs technique. It's just to me, the intuitive technique. It's the only one that is almost guaranteed to work, because we're just saying, if you can do something to a document and you can find and access that document, then you should be able to go and do that to that document. And how do you do it at scale? Well, you put in the right layers of automation, put in the right layers of understanding, educate yourself of what can be done to the documents, then work with somebody like Shinydocs or others who knows how to say, okay, well, that thing that you want to do to this type of document, well, here's 10,000 of them over there. Here's the path, or here's where they are in SharePoint. Go do it and get that value without having to get your legs broken.
So, Jason, I got a dumb question. When you look at Office 365, we always think of that as being in the cloud, right?
Sure.
But we have lots of applications in the cloud, lots of app services that we use in today's world. Is your tool capable of crawling those within the cloud, or because I've worked with others that couldn't, so I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, thanks for the question, David. It's yes, and the way we think of it is just is the content network accessible or not? If it is network accessible, then we can handle it, because I know how to get to Microsoft 365, and they actually have very well published APIs. They're reasonably good to work with. So they want people to build stuff on top of their platform. So they're happy for us to crawl and consume and understand that information. The reason why people will ask that question in the first place is because we've been trained to think, oh, well, I got to go move it to this other system before I get any of the value of that system. So then we ask, do you work with this or that? So if we say, like if you're asking me, can we get access to ServiceNow information? Yeah, for sure. I can. It's network accessible. Yep. Can I get access to shared drives? Yep, absolutely. Email, no problem. Microsoft 365. What about stuff behind the firewall? Okay, can we get secure network access? Yep, for sure. But the old way of thinking is, does this other system include the same capability as this other thing? Because when I put it in there, I don't want to lose that other capability. So hence these types of questions is, do you work with this or do you work with that? But when you think of it more generically at a higher level, it is, if we can see the document, if we can get API access to it, then we can provide the value for that particular document. Microsoft 365 doesn't necessarily like that, because they make money by selling or renting your content back to you month after month. So every transaction, every point you put a document in there, it's more likely that you need to rent that document back to them. You pay consumption fees, per user license fees, E5 agreement fees, these types of things, just to get your own data back. And that's okay for data that needs to be there, because it is a great spot to collaborate. It's a great spot to share outside of your firewall, absolutely. But as a spot to say, we're going to move 100 terabytes of file share data into Microsoft 365 just to get it off-prem, just to be able to get rid of some IT staff or something like that, that's a monumental challenge, because that file shares, those 100 terabytes, is not just data, it's an ecosystem. And you have to move the ecosystem up there, meaning you can't break people's linked Excel spreadsheets. I've been emailing people links to the file share for years, and now every link that I've emailed to people is broken. Every favorite I've set on my desktop is broken. My XREFs inside of my CAD drawings are broken now. So the ecosystem itself must remain intact when you move it to some other location. And if it doesn't, you got to be prepared to deal with the consequences. And truly, I believe that's why Gartner says 83% of migrations fail. It is not because people can't move a file from A to B. That's easy. I can drag and drop anything from my desktop into O365. No problem. The problem is everybody that expected that document to work there, the fact that the document needed to be there in order for its referential integrity to stay intact, everything about the ecosystem of that document is broken now that I moved it up there, unless I can somehow recreate that ecosystem up in the cloud. So I apologize again for a super long answer, but it's all tied together in you got to take the services to where the content is. And if it is an O365, great, because it provides lots of value.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, no problem, David.
What types of information security protocols do you guys have to kind of protect different types of information from access from different users?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I really appreciate the question. So when we do the following activity, so because we can pre-calculate searches across all of the content, I'll give an example of things that we do with customers. Is we will identify documents that we know are sensitive, for example. And sensitive, you can use this word generically in terms of whatever it means to be something that is a higher profile of security or whatever. We'll identify them regardless of whether they're in 365 or on shared drives or anywhere else. So quite often, the first activity is, oh my God, some of these are in email, just delete them from Exchange. So fine, we'll run a script that'll go and take them out of Exchange and just get rid of them so that those sensitive documents aren't just floating around in somebody's email in or out box. Then for the rest of the locations, for example, on a shared drive, now we have a list of where all the sensitive documents are in a shared drive. So in order to then do a further interrogation with our tool to say, well, who has permissions to all of these things? Because when we think about the bad rap that shared drives have got with respect to a permission, it is really around the fact that IT people are just sick and tired of having to change permissions so that Rick can see the information that Rick needs to see. So what do? They just open it up, read for everybody, or even worse, write for everybody. Go ahead, have at it. It's the Wild West. So the permissions model that has been built on top of these file share like shared drive platforms, it's really discreet. It's really powerful, but we're lazy, so we don't really apply it too much. But what if you had a tool that we can quickly identify, search, and say, all these 45,000 documents here are controlled documents that should only be accessible by this one Active Directory group? Well, we have scripts that allow you to change file share permissions to whatever you want based upon result sets from our search index, from our analytics engine. So you type in, say, I want everybody else to have no read. I only want this group to have read and write access to them. And I want to turn on the enhanced auditing on that the file share gives you by default. So you do that. And that's the way this democratization of permissions management away from the overworked and like underfunded IT group, they just can't service everybody's request for that. But you can, as the data steward, if you're given a toolkit that says, okay, I'm going to apply these big rules that say this type of content is only accessible for these people, this type of content is only accessible for these people. So the M365 controls in SharePoint is actually good enough for a lot of those cases. The NTFS permissions, or whatever the equivalent is for other file systems on file shares, they're actually more than sufficient for doing the task. The thing that's always failed in the past is having an ergonomic way of actually finding the information quickly and changing the rules quickly. So some of the technology that we're bringing to the market is a lot to complement this. Is, for example, the ability to use check-in and check-out metaphor on a file share. So we take away everybody's permission to write to anything. So now there's no such thing as ransomware attacks or crypto locker attacks, because they can't open up your files and lock the files. Nobody has write access. And then people have to right-click on the document and explicitly request access to write to that file share document. So when you have that capability on a file share, plus the ability to do things in bulk, now all of a sudden your permission management doesn't seem so daunting. So anyway, that's how we view permissions, because permissions are a plurality of systems, and it's really about the role of who needs access to what. You can finally start thinking about zero trust. I'll tell you one other app that we built on top of our platform. It's just a cool little app that plugs into everybody's Outlook. And say you have documents that are identified as ones that you're not allowed to share, whether they're sensitive or IP related or whatever. The Outlook plugin, if anybody tries to attach a document that is one of these documents, or is using our AI technology, a configured amount like any of those documents, the user is rebuked and it says, sorry, you cannot email this document. And here's why. It's because it's been flagged as sensitive, it's been flagged as IP related, it's been flagged as controlled. And so then the user can't email it to somebody, because that's really what we're up against typically in typical exploits. It's not sometimes it's the hacker that is targeting you and somehow getting in through your firewalls, or using manipulating the people in your organization to get in there. But more often than not, it's just the lazy attacker who sends out 1 million people, here's a virus, hopefully somebody opens it up, and then next thing you know, you have ransomware on your system. And those are the types of things that tend to happen. So you want to mitigate against the most likely scenarios. Same thing with people leaking information from the organization. Most leaks happen just because people don't know. I downloaded a bunch of stuff, and then I emailed it to a friend, and then they sent it to the newspaper. Like it happens. So if you can say this stuff is intellectual property, it's not allowed to leave the organization, and stop it at the email, maybe there's still a way an attacker can still get in there, but at least you've mitigated the most likely threat scenario.
So Jason, what you're saying then is you have a component of almost DLP, data loss protection, in there, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Am I getting that right? Okay.
Yeah, because data loss protection is a tough one, in that we think too much about perimeter security when we think about security. We think about, okay, well, we got to make sure the firewall is good, the moat around the city is really strong, and the reality is each piece of information that's inside of the city needs their own protection, if you will. So if you can use the permissions on each of the files to make sure that even if somebody gets through the perimeter, they still can't access the other information. And having checkpoints at the gates, making sure that the information that is leaving is stuff that is allowed to leave. That is the essentials of data loss prevention. But unfortunately, the systems that are out there, like take, for example, Microsoft's data loss prevention, it's cool, but all it is just keyword searching, that you set up a rule using that regular expression saying, if it contains the word confidential, then don't let it go out. Well, every one of my emails has that confidential statement on the bottom of it. So I'm not allowed to send email anymore. It's kind of goofy. You need something that has pre-calculated that information. What is truly confidential? What does it actually mean? What is the life cycle of the document? What are the permissions that need to be layered on top of it? And once you've done that, then these DLP controls actually become a very simple extension of all of that nice work that you've done across the data.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, David. So it looks like we've got 4 minutes left. This was some good interaction. I appreciate everybody who asked questions today. That was great. I view these conversations kind of as, certainly as an advertisement for Shinydocs, our company. We're really excited to be able to go and talk to the street about this. But it is more to me of an advertisement for this way of thinking, to think about, okay, what are vendors doing and why are they doing it the way that they do? Why do they want me to migrate my stuff? Why do they want me to change the way I do business? Why? And ask those questions as to, is it in my best interest to follow the way that vendor is doing it, or is it in their best interest? And then hopefully I get an outcome associated with that. So even if you don't buy anything from us, but you start thinking about it that way and forcing the industry to curve in that direction, that helps us, because ultimately there's not a lot of trust out there for enterprise content management and ECM systems, but there is a massive amount of need and value in proper records management, as we know. So really, I'm trying to light a bit of a fire from a technology perspective under a different way of thinking about getting that records management value across more data. And truly appreciate the time that everybody took today. This is a great session.